If Washington controls the brains of the AI revolution, then Beijing controls the organs, who actually survives when they cut each other off. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Commute Commentary, where we look past the narrative to cut through regional bias. Today we are diving into the AI semiconductor suffocation, a high-stakes geopolitical chokehold that has Wall Street panicking and the global tech industry gasping for air.
It really is a two-front war right now, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And for you listening, whether you're navigating your commute or just trying to make sense of the market, consider this deep dive your map. Because this complex web of global tech supply chains, it's literally going to dictate the future of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, because on one side, you have the United States actively restricting the brains, so the advanced AI processors and the equipment used to make them.
Right.
And on the other side, China is restricting the organs, the rare earth elements, and raw materials that actually make the hardware physically possible.
So let's start with the brains, right? The American perspective. Because there's been some serious regulatory whiplash coming out of Washington recently.
Massive whiplash.
Yeah, the incoming Trump administration basically just tore up that Biden-era policy, the AI diffusion rule.
Right, which was this huge, sweeping piece of legislation. It placed these strict blanket caps on the volume of advanced computing hardware that I think it was 120 different countries could import.
120. Which is insane. The logic was broad containment, right? Like starve the adversaries by just casting the widest net possible.
Exactly. But industry reports indicate that Washington quickly realized they were, well, accidentally suffocating their closest allies in the process.
Right, because if you put a ceiling on computing imports for rapidly developing tech hubs, places like Israel or India or Singapore.
You're not just delaying their domestic AI sectors, you're creating this artificial market vacuum. The AI diffusion rule basically treated trusted allies as collateral damage. So the shift we're seeing now toward this new trusted partners approach, it fundamentally changes the whole philosophy.
It goes from global containment to, like, allied ring fencing.
Exactly. Washington is essentially offering a geopolitical bargain. They're saying, align your domestic tech regulations with U.S. standards, and you get unimpeded access to the hardware.
And we should clarify, the hardware in question here isn't just your run-of-the-mill generic processor. We're talking about top-tier AI chips, the bleeding-edge stuff like the Blackwell architecture.
Oh, yeah. The Blackwell chips are monsters.
They really are. I mean, for anyone tracking the specs, the Blackwell chip utilizes something like 208 billion transistors.
Staggering.
It gives you a multi-fold increase in processing speed over the legacy generations. So the U.S. Commerce Department has drawn this hard line, blocking those frontier models from reaching Chinese tech giants.
But, and this is the crucial part, they aren't instituting a total embargo.
Right. They're intentionally authorizing the sale of these downgraded second-tier chips, things like the H200 and the H20.
Yeah, and that looks like a very deliberate strategy. They want to keep Chinese AI development tethered to American software ecosystems like CUDA.
Just operating right below the actual technological frontier.
That's the core mechanism of the dependency strategy, really, because you have to look at how modern AI is actually trained. You don't just, train a massive large language model on one single chip.
No, it's a massive cluster. Tens of thousands of chips working in parallel.
Exactly. And the raw mathematical processing power of a single downgraded H20 chip is still quite good, but where the US regulators specifically nerfed these authorized chips is in the interconnect bandwidth.
The speed at which the chips can actually talk to each other.
Right. They took those interconnect speeds down from, I believe, around 900 gigabytes per second to 400 gigabytes per second.
Oh, wow. So less than half.
Yeah.
So when you string 10,000 of these things together, that interconnect bottleneck just compounds exponentially.
Exponentially. The processing units end up sitting idle for these tiny fractions of a second, just waiting for data to arrive from their neighbor.
And that idle time basically destroys the efficiency of a multi-million-dollar data center.
Yep. Which translates directly to time and capital. A model that takes an American firm, say, 3 weeks and $10 million to train.
Yeah.
It might take a Chinese firm running on that downgraded hardware 3 months and $40 million.
Ouch. So Washington is essentially guaranteeing that Chinese AI models structurally lag behind the West.
Right. And second, the billions of dollars China spends purchasing those throttled chips, that money flows directly back to U.S. firms.
Who then reinvest it into researching the next generation of unrestricted hardware.
Exactly. It's a financial feedback loop.
But I mean, the global supply chain abhors a vacuum. It's like a massive game of whack-a-mole. You place a restriction here, a gray market pops up over there.
Oh, the gray market is thriving right now.
Yeah, the sources we're looking at detail this huge crackdown on overseas loopholes, specifically in Southeast Asia.
Malaysia and Singapore, mostly?
Right, free trade zones, where cutting-edge hardware is just systematically being smuggled to Chinese subsidiaries. We're not talking about some guy hiding a processor in a backpack.
No. Analysts estimate tens of thousands of restricted units have bypassed the embargo. Shell companies, falsified end-user certificates, you name it.
But how do they even track that? Once a server rack clears customs in Singapore, auditing the final end user has to be basically impossible.
It is incredibly difficult. A distributor in Singapore might legally buy a batch of advanced chips for a local data center.
Right. Perfectly legal on paper.
But behind a complex web of corporate ownership, that local data center is actually just a front. It's leasing its computational power directly to engineers sitting over in Shenzhen.
Ah, cloud access.
Yeah, so to counter this, the U.S. Department of Commerce is issuing strict new guidance targeting the overseas branches of Chinese firms. They're trying to regulate the physical movement of the silicon, sure, but also the cloud-based access to the computing power itself.
Which brings us to the MAT-CH Act. Because apparently regulating the physical chips and the cloud access still isn't enough.
Not even close.
So this proposed MPCH Act moves the battlefront entirely. It goes from the final product to the foundational manufacturing tools. And they aren't just targeting the bleeding-edge EUV machines.
Right, the extreme ultraviolet ones.
Yeah. The legislation proposes extending the export bans to older, decade-old deep ultraviolet lithography tools. The DUV machines.
Which are basically the workhorse systems of the industry.
Exactly. They print legacy nodes. We're talking 28-nanometer chips, the ones that run your car, your microwave, industrial robotics. So they're shifting from stalling AI to potentially crippling the broader foundational manufacturing base.
And the rationale there revolves around dual-use capability. Chinese foundries have actually figured out how to use multiple patterning with these older DUV machines.
Wait, what does that mean?
Basically, they run the silicon wafer through the older machine 3 or 4 times. It artificially shrinks the transistors down to a 7-nanometer equivalent. Oh, wow. So they're hacking the old machines to make new chips.
Exactly. Now, it is hideously expensive, the yield rates are terrible, but it proves that older machines can still produce advanced silicon if you're willing to just burn enough capital.
Right. And if Beijing corners the market on legacy chip production, they could theoretically flood the global market with cheap foundational chips,
Driving Western legacy foundries completely out of business. So the MAT-CH Act is attempting to sever that tooling pipeline before they achieve that structural dominance.
It's an incredibly intense approach. I mean, to summarize the severity of Washington's strategy, one defense analyst in our sources described the U.S. policy by stating it is actively strangling large segments of the Chinese technology industry, strangling with an intent to kill. That is their specific perspective. We do not endorse or validate that stance, but it shows how polarized the conversation has become.
It really is polarized.
And this hyperfixation on the top of the tech stack, the processing power, the manufacturing tools, it inevitably forces a reactionary squeeze at the foundational layer, the organs. Right, the literal earth required to build the power.
Yeah, so let's shift to China's retaliation. Because if the U.S. is withholding the silicon, Beijing is withholding the rocks.
Yeah.
We're seeing this massive expansion of export controls covering 12 of the 17 rare earth elements.
Yeah, they recently added holmium, erbium, thulium.
Europium and indium.
Yes, and the selection of these specific elements is highly calculated to maximize disruption. Take holmium, for example.
Okay.
It has the highest magnetic strength of any element, so it's absolutely irreplaceable for creating the ultra-powerful magnets used in high-performance magneto-optical data storage.
Which you need for AI data centers.
Exactly. Or europium. It's a foundational phosphor element. Without it, the advanced displays and quantum state sensors in modern devices simply cannot function.
And it's not just the raw rocks they're restricting, right?
Oh, Beijing has embargoed the proprietary technologies and the heavy machinery used to actually mine, smelt, separate, and synthesize these materials.
So they're aggressively targeting the American supply chain. The reports detail how China banned dual-use exports to 10 specific U.S. tech and defense firms.
Hitting major rare earth producers like MP Materials and USA Rare Earth directly.
Right, and they instituted a government procurement embargo on 46 U.S. companies. But the vulnerability here isn't just that China mines the rocks. It's the refining monopoly.
The separation process.
Yeah, the chemical separation involves these highly complex, extremely environmentally hazardous solvent extraction processes.
Toxic stuff.
Really toxic. And for decades, Western companies were perfectly happy to offshore that capital-intensive refining process to China. Now that offshore dependency is being weaponized.
Well, the market dominance is total. China processes nearly 90% of the world's rare earth elements.
90%?
Yeah. So a company like MP Materials, they can mine thousands of tons of raw ore in California, but historically they just had to load that ore onto ships and send it to China for processing.
Because the domestic refining infrastructure just didn't exist at scale?
Right. And Beijing is now leveraging this bottleneck with extraordinary extraterritorial reach. They introduced this 0.1% de minimis rule.
Oh, this rule is wild.
It really is. Under this regulation, if a product is manufactured anywhere in the world, but it contains even 0.1% of Chinese origin restricted rare earths by value.
1/10 of 1%.
Yeah, it requires a specialized license from Beijing to be exported to a third country.
The auditing logistics of that are a corporate compliance nightmare. I mean, think about the globalized nature of just a single cooling fan inside an AI server rack.
Right.
You've got copper from Chile, plastics from Germany, assembly happening in Mexico, and then there's this microscopic neodymium magnet refined in China.
Exactly. Proving the exact origin and value of every fractional milligram of rare earth material through, like, mass spectrometry and bill of materials audits, it's nearly impossible for a midstream manufacturer.
And they paired that with a 50% rule, too, meaning these restrictions apply to any overseas subsidiary where an entity on China's restricted list holds 50% or more of the equity.
It creates total paralysis across the supply chain. Mid-tier manufacturers in neutral countries are suddenly forced to choose. Do they completely tear down their established supply networks to purge Chinese materials?
Or risk devastating legal and economic retaliation from Beijing if they export without a license? It effectively weaponizes corporate compliance.
It turns international trade law into an extension of state power.
But let me push back on this a bit. Because what about the long-term viability of this strategy? Isn't China's control over rare earths essentially a single-use weapon?
How do you mean?
Well, if we look at extreme resource embargoes historically, like when natural rubber supplies to the U.S. were cut off during World War II, it acted as the ultimate catalyst.
For the synthetic rubber program.
Exactly. The embargo forced the target to heavily fund their own independent alternatives. So if China pulls this trigger now, they artificially inflate domestic prices, which harms their own midstream magnet manufacturers.
While forcing Western governments to completely de-risk their supply chains.
Right. Pouring billions into independent processing facilities. Does it just accelerate foreign independence?
Well, the timeline of replaceability is the crucial variable there. Geopolitical experts stress that the U.S. and its allies actually possess massive untapped rare earth deposits.
So it's not a geological shortage?
No, never has been. The historical barrier to Western production was a total lack of financial incentive. The Chinese solvent extraction process was heavily subsidized, it was efficient, and it was so cheap that Western competitors just went bankrupt when they tried to compete.
But now the math has changed.
Exactly. By restricting supply and introducing massive compliance friction, Beijing has fundamentally altered the risk profile for Western capital. We're already seeing billions of dollars in government grants and private equity flowing into heavy rare earth separation facilities.
Places like Texas, Canada, Australia.
Right. But it's a race against the clock. The West has to physically build out that heavy chemical refining capacity before the material starvation stalls their hardware deployment.
And while Washington and Beijing are trading these massive structural blows over silicon and minerals, we really need to look at the collateral damage in the secondary market.
Yes, the squeezed middle.
Because Europe is currently caught directly in the crossfire. The European Union has realized that AI processing power is the next great utility, and they are pouring billions of euros into localized AI gigafactories.
But as one analyst in the reports noted, Europe is essentially building the car but renting the engine.
That's a great way to put it. because the operational reality of these AI gigafactories really highlights the illusion of European technological independence.
Oh, entirely. The EU is providing massive real estate, securing gigawatts of electricity, building the water cooling infrastructure.
But the tens of thousands of advanced AI chips powering the neural networks inside those buildings,
Yeah.
exclusively imported from American designers.
Right. And simultaneously, the specialized magnets in the cooling infrastructure and the rare earth trace elements on the circuit boards entirely reliant on Chinese refining.
So Europe has operational capability, but they are completely devoid of technological sovereignty. I mean, it's like an ambitious chef trying to open a Michelin star restaurant, but they have to buy all their ingredients from two rival supermarkets that just keep changing the locks on their doors.
That's exactly what it feels like for them. And this two-level dependency is creating immense political friction, particularly around ASML.
ASML, the Dutch firm. They basically hold a virtual global monopoly on the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, the EUV ones used to print frontier AI chips.
Right, and the physics behind ASML's EUV machines illustrate why they're an irreplaceable monopoly. To print these microscopic transistors on a modern AI chip, ASML machines literally drop microscopic droplets of molten tin inside a vacuum chamber.
Wait, they shoot molten tin?
Yeah, and then they shoot those droplets with a high-power carbon dioxide laser. Twice. In rapid succession.
That sounds like science fiction.
It is incredible. The first pulse flattens the tin into a pancake. The second pulse vaporizes it into a plasma that emits extreme ultraviolet light.
And then that light etches the patterns.
Yeah, it's bounced off a series of the flattest mirrors ever created by humanity to etch patterns just a few nanometers wide onto a silicon wafer. Nobody else on Earth has managed to commercialize this physical process.
And because of that monopoly, ASML is caught squarely in the crosshairs of the U.S. EVCH Act that we discussed earlier.
Exactly. While the U.S. wants to ban the sale of older DUV machines to China, those legacy systems represent billions of euros in revenue and long-term service contracts for ASML.
So European chipmakers and government officials are pushing back aggressively. They view unilateral U.S. export controls as a massive overreach.
It's all about economic statecraft. From the European perspective, initiatives like the U.S.-led Pax Silica Pact feel less like an alliance and more like, well, technological colonization.
Right, because if European capitals refuse to align with Washington's export controls, they risk secondary sanctions.
Which could cut off their access to American software and AI processors, instantly turning their new gigafactories into empty warehouses.
But if they blindly accept the MTCH Act, they wipe out major revenue streams for their own domestic tech champions. And expose themselves to retaliatory mineral embargoes from Beijing.
They're trapped in a high-wire survival act. They're heavily subsidizing new fabrication plants in places like Dresden, Germany, but they lack both the massive venture capital ecosystems and the domestic chip design firms that the U.S. enjoys.
But, here's where the entire dynamic takes a left turn. Because geopolitics aside, the actual laws of physics are forcing a massive foundational shift in how these chips are actually built.
The technological escape hatch.
Exactly. It's creating an entirely new battlefield that bypasses the current supply chain wars. We are talking about the shift to glass substrates.
This materials transition represents the most critical engineering bottleneck in the entire sector right now. For 60 years, the industry followed Moore's law, the steady shrinking of transistors to increase power.
But transistor scaling is fundamentally plateaued, right? We're hitting the atomic limits of silicon.
We really are. The new bottleneck dictating AI performance isn't the microscopic transistor itself anymore, it's the packaging.
The substrate.
Yes, the foundation underneath the chip that routes the electrical signals and the power between the chip and the broader system.
And we are hitting a hard physical limit with current organic substrates. For decades, the standard has been these resin-based films, like ABF Ajinomoto buildup film.
And those organic resins were fine for small, low-power processors, but modern AI chips aren't just single pieces of silicon anymore. They are these gargantuan agglomerations of multiple chiplets and towering stacks of high-bandwidth memory.
Right, all crammed together on a single package.
And when you drive the massive amounts of electricity required to run trillions of calculations a second through these systems, they generate intense localized heat.
And when you blast organic resin with that kind of thermal output, it literally warps.
The warping is caused by a thermal expansion mismatch. Organic materials expand and contract at a significantly different rate than the silicon chip sitting directly on top of them.
Oh, so as the AI processor cycles between extreme heat and cooling, it creates immense physical stress.
Exactly. Stress that can literally tear the microsolder bumps right off the package, destroying the chip. And because organic substrates are essentially flexible plastics, they are never perfectly flat at a microscopic level.
Right.
That surface roughness severely limits the wiring density. On an organic substrate, the finest wires you can reliably print are restricted to a pitch of about 8 to 10 micrometers.
Think of organic substrates like a multi-lane highway built on a foundation of mud. As the temperature shifts, the mud expands and contracts, the lanes physically misalign, and eventually the road just tears itself apart.
That's a perfect analogy.
And if you want to increase the traffic, the data throughput, you can't just draw the lanes closer together because the rough foundation won't support it. That brings us to the physics of glass. Why is everyone racing to replace organic resin with glass cores?
Well, glass fundamentally changes the physical limits of chip packaging. First, its coefficient of thermal expansion can be precisely engineered to match silicon perfectly.
So when the chip gets hot, the glass expands at the exact same rate.
Right, eliminating the physical stress that destroys organic packages. Second, glass is ultra-flat and rigid at an atomic level.
Which allows engineers to utilize through glass vias.
Yes, enabling signal wiring that is roughly 10 times finer than organic materials, shrinking the pitch down to 1 or 2 micrometers.
That density is the holy grail. I mean, it means you can pack significantly more chiplets closer together.
Yeah.
It drastically reduces the distance the electrical signals have to travel, which lowers power consumption and massively increases data speed.
And the manufacturing economics are completely different too. You don't process glass on a standard 12-inch circular wafer. You can process it on massive rectangular panels.
Panel-level manufacturing.
Yeah, that's the true economic disruptor. By utilizing panel formats reaching 500 by 500 millimeters, manufacturers gain over 300% more usable surface area compared to a standard round wafer.
Wow, 300%. So larger surface area means you can print significantly more packages per run?
Massively improving yield and driving down the cost per unit at scale.
Which sets up a completely new geopolitical race. While politicians in Washington and Beijing are obsessing over who controls the silicon and the rare earths, the true battle for the next decade of computing might actually be who controls the glass.
Definitely. Whoever masters the laser-induced etching and the metallization required to commercialize glass packaging first, they're going to dictate the architecture of the next generation of hyperscale data centers.
And the reports note that all the heavy hitters are aiming for deployment between 2026 and 2030. Intel was the first to publicly unveil industry-leading glass core substrates.
Right, leaning heavily on specialized global glass vendors. And Samsung is moving aggressively, utilizing their display manufacturing expertise to ship mass production samples.
TSMC is establishing experimental glass lines in Taiwan, too.
It perfectly illustrates the vulnerability of relying entirely on legacy export controls. Geopolitical strategy often falls into the trap of fighting the last war. Regulating deep ultraviolet lithography and controlling the mining of holmium, those are vital strategies for the current hardware generation.
But if the physical limit of AI scaling is now dictated by integration density and thermal management, the mastery of advanced packaging materials like glass becomes the new strategic high ground.
Exactly. The nation that scales glass core substrates first won't just build a marginally faster chip. They will establish a proprietary architectural standard that the rest of the world will be forced to adopt.
So let's zoom out and map the entirety of this global collision, because we are watching 3 distinct, massive survival strategies play out simultaneously in real time.
Right. To summarize the landscape objectively based on our sources, the United States is actively utilizing targeted export controls and massive domestic subsidies to protect its technological edge and national security. They're aiming to lock adversaries permanently beneath the frontier of computing power.
Right, and China.
China is leveraging its absolute dominance over critical mineral refining and implementing sweeping extraterritorial trade rules. They're acting to protect their sovereign resources, inflict reciprocal economic friction, and violently accelerate their own domestic self-sufficiency.
And then there's Europe in the middle.
Meanwhile, Europe and secondary tech hubs are executing a precarious survival strategy. They're attempting to leverage their limited monopolies, like advanced lithography, to build out sovereign digital infrastructure without becoming economic collateral damage in a superpower conflict.
It's just a giant web of dependencies.
It is. There is no inherent right or wrong side in this structural dynamic. There are only competing global interests fundamentally reshaping the physical foundation of the digital economy.
It really really forces you to look at the entire artificial intelligence boom through a radically different lens. And for you, listening on your commute or at your desk, I want to leave you with one final thought. Consider the ultimate irony of artificial intelligence. We are talking about the most ethereal, complex technology in human history. We are building neural networks capable of rewriting code, generating breathtaking art, and simulating human consciousness. Yet for all its digital brilliance, this seemingly magical technology is currently entirely at the absolute mercy of rare rocks pulled from the dirt and microscopic metal wires etched into sheets of glass. The cloud isn't in the sky, it is buried deep within a highly fragile, highly contested supply chain. Will AI eventually become capable enough to engineer a physical solution to the very resource war it created?